can make an immediate difference. We want to see the international community's resources targeted to stabilizing the security situation in these areas, restoring state authority and the rule of law, ensuring the delivery of humanitarian assistance and basic services, and promoting reconciliation efforts. It's important to demonstrate that communities can continue to live side by side in peace and stability. Mr. President, as highlighted by the Secretary General in his 6-point proposal, the humanitarian response in the Central African Republic is severely underfunded, further limiting our reach to people in need. And time is not on our side. A food crisis is looming, and with the rainy season upon us, millions of people would be at risk of communicable diseases. Movement for Central African Republic people, troops, and for humanitarian workers within the country will be severely restricted as the already poorly maintained roads become impassable. While increased logistics capacity will be required once the rains set in, financial support is urgently needed now to provide seals and tools so that people can plant, to support the prepositioning of stocks and voluntary returns where possible, and to improve conditions in IDP sites. The Humanitarian Strategic Response Plan for 2014 requests $551 million for humanitarian interventions in CAR. It is modest given the scale of need, but is only funded at 16%. Many pledges made at the January Brussels conference, which I co-chaired with EU Commissioner Georgieva, have yet to translate into funds. I ask member states and international organizations who made pledges to honor them as soon as possible. As the UN and operational partners extend humanitarian operations outside Bangui, continued financial support by the international community is crucial to support our efforts. The humanitarian situation in the Central African Republic is dire, and more must be done to ensure that the work of the transition government, humanitarian workers, Sangaris and MISCA troops is sustained. We must provide the people of the Central African Republic with the security that they need and the services and assistance they require so that peace and reconciliation efforts have some chance of success. Thank you.
Je remercie Madame Ames pour son exposé et je donne la parole à Monsieur Antonio Guterres.
Mr. President, Excellencies, I do not remember any field visit in my 8-year tenure as High Commissioner that caused me such anguish as my recent trip to the Central African Republic. I was deeply shocked by the brutality and inhumanity that have characterized the violence happening in the country and its consequences on the suffering of the people. The evolution of the Central African refugee situation in the region clearly illustrates that while this is clearly not a new crisis, the country has been in some sort of trouble since the beginning, its current phase is in no way more of the same. By end 2012, there were already 165,000 refugees registered in the neighboring countries of Cameroon, Chad, the Democratic Republic of Congo, and the Republic of Congo. That number has by now grown to over 290,000. Some 65,000 refugees fled last year, largely in the aftermath of the Seleka coup. Another 60,000 have sought refuge abroad since December 2013, when the violence grew to a horrific scale, including with the emergence of the anti-Balaka militias. In addition, more than 80,000 foreign nationals have left the country, many with the help of their own states and IOM. Cameroon hosts the largest Central African refugee population, with over 34,000 new arrivals since December and some 130,000 in total. The situation is dramatic, with refugees arriving scared, malnourished, and extremely vulnerable after having walked and hidden in the forests for days and weeks. Many convoys to the border are attacked, and international forces are too thinly spread to be able to provide effective protection. Once refugees cross the border, living conditions are extremely difficult. Local communities in all neighboring countries have responded with enormous generosity, with faith leaders mobilizing the donations from the local population and some families hosting up to 100 refugees in their compounds. In some locations, like Kentzu in eastern Cameroon, the number of refugees and repatriated nationals of other countries hosted there now exceeds the local population, creating enormous pressure on scarce resources and infrastructure in what it is a remote area of the country. And humanitarian actors are scrambling to relocate refugees from scattered and difficult to reach locations along the border to sites with better assistance possibilities before they become cut off with the beginning of the rainy season. But we are far from being able to deliver what is needed, given the very precarious situation of the people we care for. The resources we have are entirely insufficient compared with the rapidly growing challenges we face. In Cameroon, as in other neighboring countries, robust international financial support is required to respond to the enormous needs of the new arrivals and support the host communities that have so generously taken them in. And I can say without exaggeration that we are dramatically underfunded and have only been able to respond by using our own limited reserves. UNHCR is also working within the interagency response inside CAR, leading the protection cluster, as well as coordinating camp management and shelter programs for the internally displaced. But these are areas in which we have always been thoroughly briefed by the emergency relief coordinator. In addition, we are concerned for the safety of the over 17,000 refugees from other countries still in CAR, 70% of them from the Democratic Republic of Congo. We have been supporting the repatriation of those who wish to return from Bangui and Batalimo, and are assisting others in Bambari and Zemu, where they are not immediately under threat. Excellencies, allow me to convey some of my impressions from my recent visit to CAR, although they go beyond the scope of my immediate responsibilities as High Commissioner, but because they clearly show, from a humanitarian perspective, the importance of approving the Secretary General's proposals. Since independence, the country has witnessed a succession of coups d'etat with only one democratic transition in the 90s. The state had been progressively disappearing already long before events took a new dramatic turn with the emergence of the Seleka in late 2012. However, this new phase of the conflict differs starkly from the earlier crisis, largely due to the way it is tearing apart the social fabric of the country. Until last year, CAR was largely a stranger to religious conflict, which is why it would be wrong to analyze current events that way. While religiously motivated conflicts usually start out as faith being instrumentalized for political purposes, the real danger is that religious tensions then gain a dynamic of their own, a demon that once unleashed becomes exceedingly difficult to stop and threatens to completely destroy society. And this is what risks happening in CAR. The Seleka alliance was formed from Central African rebel groups and various foreign elements and was indeed predominantly Muslim, although their political agenda had nothing to do with aspirations to create an Islamic state. But the interreligious and intercommunal dimension of the conflict emerged after the looting and atrocities against civilians committed by Seleka and ex-Seleka members, which were at the origin of the first refugee outflow of last year, and which in turn led to the emergence of the anti-Balaka militias. And in the beginning, the international community and actors on the ground were slow to understand that the process of disarming the Seleka changed the balance of forces on the ground and that the anti-Balaka was quickly growing into a new monster with a different nature from the initial more or less spontaneous self-defense groups. Although it's mainly made up of frustrated youth, criminal elements, ex-soldiers, and militias supporting the former president, and although its main motivations have become revenge and looting, it was quickly mislabeled as Christian, which fueled the interreligious dimension of the violence. And since early December, we have effectively witnessed a cleansing of the majority of the Muslim population in Western CAR. And tens of thousands of them have left the country, the second refugee outflow of the current crisis I mentioned, and most of those remaining are under permanent threat. Just last week, there were about 15,000 people trapped in 18 locations in Western CAR, surrounded by anti-Balaka elements and at very high risk of attack. International forces are present in some of these sites, but if more security is not made available immediately, many of these civilians risk being killed right before our eyes. It's a glimmer of hope that in a few places, communities and courageous religious leaders are starting to take mediation into their own hands. And the strengthening of the civilian capacity of BINUCA that was mentioned, and the Secretary General insists in its importance to support mediation efforts, is an urgent and decisive need. The demon of religious cleansing must be stopped, and must be stopped now. And to do this, the most important protection and humanitarian objective inside CER is the re-establishment of security and law and order. And this is a key focus of the Secretary General's six-point initiative. The immediate reinforcement of international forces, in particular with police contingents to ensure security in the neighborhoods, is the biggest imperative. Another is immediate financial support to the government to re-establish its capacity to function and put in place at least a basic police and justice system able to arrest, to try, and to jail criminals. I must say I was also very strongly impressed by the new president. But the thing that impressed me more was when she confessed that she had not a cent. She was not able, long after she was elected, to pay any of the salaries in arrears. She has appealed for the possibility to pay 2 months of the many that are in debt, and until now, she was not given those resources that are absolutely essential to establish her credibility and to be able to put in place the minimum requirements of a functioning state. Current events in CAR can also potentially destabilize the whole region. Continued brutality against Muslim communities could create a pretext for extremist terrorist forces already present in other parts of the continent to spread to its center. While the violence has been concentrated in the West, we also must not forget the long-neglected East. I was there 3 years ago when the MINURCA ended its mission, and we had a camp of 5,000 refugees from Sudan. There was no presence of the state in that region, no security at all, and we had to remove the refugees from the northeastern part of the country to the center, to close to Bambari, as an absolute requirement to protect them, because it was impossible to do it in that part of the country. There, in the northeastern part of the country, the present leadership could easily be challenged, explaining some of the concerns that have been expressed over a possible fragmentation of the country that can and must be avoided. National and international efforts to respond to the current crisis therefore need to take into account all of CAR. And they must also acknowledge that the reconstruction of a disappeared state is, as it was said, an intensive and time-consuming process which must go far beyond calm being restored and elections taking place. Thank you very much.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur Guterres. Et je passe la parole à Son Excellence, Monsieur